When words swim up from the depths of the hearts of man and cascade as rivers across their lips, the same utterances are always spoken. The opinion of the tongue that has spoken it. Therefore, we must traverse the spoken waters of man carefully, guiding each other to the absolute river of truth. And in turn, we must gather all we can while taking it drop by drop for what it's worth.
Good evening. Welcome to For What It's Worth. Tonight we are going to be breaking down the controversial video, I Pet Goat 2. Now, some of you might be familiar with certain conspiracies surrounding 9/11, but the name of this short video is tied to the book that President George W. Bush Jr. was reading in a classroom when he learned that the hit on the World Trade Centers had happened. And the book he was reading, of course, was named I Pet Goat. And so this episode, we're going to be going into a little bit of predictive programming. There's definitely a lot of new age concepts being pushed in this film, but there are certain nuances and symbologies in the film that are predictive that we want to point out. It's fascinating because it seems to be discussing the ushering in of what we would consider an Antichrist figure, and also some world calamities happening in the year 2020. There's also markers that indicate there's some predictive elements related to 2017 and certain astrological signs that happen in the sky. So the annular solar eclipse is something that seems to be a recurring theme in the film. Also, whenever we talk about the symbology in the classroom at the beginning of the film, you guys are going to see how there's actual months represented by children in a classroom, and how the exact placement of a girl holding an apple is actually in reference to the year and the astrological signs that happened during that year. It demonstrates a buck moon and is related to a sign that's talked about in other pop culture media.
Legend and Wikipedia have it that the gem will be revealed during the first full moon after a solar eclipse.
That's tonight!
One question remains. Why did you come here?
Which I've discovered there's some interesting things about that. This is really fascinating, and we're going to break into some scripture and kind of exposit the whole cartoon in a scriptural lens. Who is the Antichrist scripturally, and how could this predictive programming be calling for the birthing of the Antichrist system, mindset, you name it, the person of the Antichrist, and calling for him to be ushered into the world. And it seems like all the timelines tied in this film, or this short film, cartoon, whatever you want to call it, are all pointing to interesting dates that we can look at today and say, hey, there's definitely some predictive elements behind this cartoon. And it's just super creepy, and we're going to be going through it, hopefully shedding some light on some of the occult themes that have been placed behind it. Now, I've come to the position that I don't know if the people who created this cartoon are directly in contact with someone on the inside. They might have just been commissioned to create this. They could just be responding to certain mainstream pop elements that have influenced all of us, and they're just kind of putting them all together, and this is in some way a communication with people that practice occult ritual magic, and there's elements in this of ritual magic. And could this be someone's attempt to communicate with people that participate in those things, and therefore certain elements of this might have played out in the real world stage because there's something special about this particular cartoon. So we're going to get into all of that. It's going to be a in-depth episode, but by no means are we going to be able to cover every aspect of this. We're going to do our best with the little amount of research we've been able to scrap together from some of the best people breaking down this topic. And Bottom line, let's get into it, Tony. What's up, man?
Hello, Jacob. Thanks for doing this again. It's my favorite part of the week, nearly. As you were saying, we could probably do 5 shows on this. Anybody who hasn't seen this, it's so creepy. It feels like it's total doublespeak. It feels like the whole thing is you're seeing one thing that just is telling a story, but doesn't make sense. But you can feel that there is a subtext through this whole thing that is telling something totally different. So I'm super excited to hop into this bucket of chum with you and see how it goes.
And I wanted to say right off the bat, guys, we're not giving any prophetic credence to these things. We're just looking at them for what it's worth. If there is any predictive elements, perhaps it can reveal what people who are buying into this New Age theology of this Christ mentality or Christ consciousness that is represented by this Antichrist figure being birthed in this cartoon. This is just us comparing what we're seeing on the world stage today with the elements in this cartoon and contrasting them with what we see in the scriptures in relation to what's supposed to come in the end times before the return of the actual Messiah, Yahusha, And so, anyways, Tony, let's start perhaps playing some of this so that people can get a taste of this creepy iPad Go 2 cartoon. So that was really interesting. What?
Oh no, that's the attitude I feel about that video. So I was just like sort of agreeing, like, well, what is this? Like, what is this video we just watched?
Oh man, it's a crazy amount of symbolism. Frame by frame, you can go through that with a comb and dig a lot out of it. And so let's just start with the first big opening scene. Of course, we have the goat, and he comes out of this hole, but the whole scene starts in darkness with a doorknob kind of eclipsing the hole that the goat eventually comes out of. And this is the first sign that there's going to be a lot of eclipse symbology in this. In that scene we're showing, it has a map of the continental United States and some famous false flag locations. BP oil spill, you have New York, of course, Manhattan Island,
9/11.
9/11. You have, I believe, what were these other two locations? I'm trying to think.
Louisiana levee breaking. Is that what that is?
It's possible. It's in
And the Oklahoma bombing.
Oklahoma City bombing. Traditionally, very popular, famous false flag type events that get conspiracy theorists just mulling over the topic. So this whole setup to this really seems to be addressing end times type topics. You have the goat with the 666 barcode on its forehead. And I know that there's been a lot of theories as to what the mark of the beast is going to be. And throughout history, some people have theorized that it's perhaps even a barcode. And yes, in some ways, these are precursors to what will eventually be the mark of the beast. See, it is through barcodes that individual item tracking is a possibility, and especially at mass quantities. And this is tied to, in some ways, capitalism and the ability for people to really nickel and dime others. It's a form of money making to be able to track and control produce and to know what products are going out, where they're located, who's buying them. And so this all ties back to this tracking system that's a facet of material greed. And I'm not going to say necessarily that it's the mark of the beast. It's just a precursor. But there are interesting aspects that have been brought out about this tracking system that evolved eventually into online digital tracking systems. And eventually we can see how that would kind of correlate to a mark of the beast type scenario. And so right off the bat, you have the guy who has the big S ring, Satan, puppeteering the world. And I think this is a telltale sign that they're revealing to you their premise behind who's pulling the strings on the world stage.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I saw that ring as the dollar sign. As with the band making the line through it. And the last time in human history that the dollar sign was used, it was the Egyptian symbol for slaves. So when you look at the slaveholder's hand, the puppeteer, with the slave ring, it sort of like, it starts painting the picture before you start to see who he's puppeteering, which it starts off to be George Bush.
And we know right off the bat with the icons that are in this first scene with George W. Bush that there's definitely a tie to the Bohemian Grove in the top left corner. You can see an owl. And with Clinton, Bush, and various other presidents, there's a strong tie to the occultic, ritualistic practices that are taking place in the Bohemian Grove. Maybe I'll show a clip here for you guys to check out.
The owl is in his leafy temple. Let all within the grove be reverent before him. Lift up your heads, O ye trees, and be ye lifted up, ye everlasting spires. For behold, here is Bohemia's shrine, holy are the pillars of this house. Our funeral pyre awaits the corpse of care. Fire shall have its will of thee, and all the winds make merry with thy dust. Bring fire! When will you learn that me he cannot slay? Year after year he burned me in this grove, lifting your puny shouts of triumph to the stars. But when again he turned your faces to the marketplace, do ye not find me waiting as of old? Fools to dream ye conquer care. Nay, thou mocking spirit, it is not all a dream. We know thou waitest for us, for this our sylvan holiday has ended. We shall meet thee and fight thee as of old, and some of us prevail against thee, and some thou shalt destroy. But this too we know. Year after year within this happy grove, our fellowship bans thee for a space. Thy malevolence which would pursue us here has lost its power under these friendly trees. So shall we burn thee once again this night, and in the flames that eat thine effigy, we shall read the sign, Midsummer sets us free.
So the Bohemian Grove was actually what made Alex Jones famous. This is the instance where he snuck in, reported the cremation of care ceremony, and this is something that reportedly many of the political elite, the big money figures in the United States and the Western world, and other high-ranking political and power-broking figures were all participating in this camp that happened once a year, the Bohemian Grove, basically ceremonies that took place, and they all tie back to ancient Canaanite rituals surrounding the worship of god Molech. And, of course, the owl is the symbol of Molech, and you can see that up in the top left corner behind me here. Moving on, we see Bush quickly transforms into Obama. And we, of course, see some more annular eclipse symbology here on Obama's cheek. You have the ring of light and the skin that represents the moon crossing in front of the sun. And, of course, this is the symbol of the Heliofant logo, the small circle next to the larger circle crescent. And I'm going to say I have a theory, and there's been a lot of people speculating about what these tiny circles next to the larger ring could possibly be. And I'm going to speculate some in this video because I think I have a theory that kind of took place on January 4th, January 5th, that could be a possible explanation behind some of the symbols that we see recurring throughout this cartoon. So, you guys, if you've studied into this before, you've not heard it taken this way, and hopefully you're going to enjoy the different perspective coming at this very popular video. So I wanted to lay this out right at the beginning. There's something to this because just recently, following the July 4th, 5th buck moon actually happening, and we're going to get into what these terms, the buck moon, mean and how it is significant in relation to this cartoon. But following the July 4th, 5th buck moon, there's been a flood of YouTube videos that are really poorly done, have very little substance to them, that just swamped YouTube and swamped many other video sharing sites. And it's hard to actually find a good breakdown of this Heliofant video now, because it almost seems like a disinformation campaign has been started, because information about this is coming out, and it seems to be so closely tied to reality in terms of predicting things in 2020, predicting presidential candidates, and even down to certain elements that we see scripturally manifesting with the whole ushering in of this Antichrist figure and the Christ consciousness that seems to be taking the world by storm as people move away from traditional Christianity and give into a very New Age, Gnostic perspective that it only can be tied to this end times one world religion.
I remember it was right after Amber and I got married. We were part of our research. We were working together, 24 karat gilding chairs for an owner of a bank, and we had lots of time to listen to stuff all day. And we were listening to. We finally went to let's just see what the New Age is saying, and maybe we'll be able to filter it through the lens. And we listened to the whole Gaia, David Wilcox, that whole genre. I think they were actually in it. And by the time we had we grasped what they were talking about, I started crying because I realized, the neighbor's like, "What's up?" I'm like, people are going to fall for this. I can see how they can fall for this. This is unbelievably crafted. It's nonsense to me because I know who the King of Kings is, but it was bonkers. And so when we see it in stuff like this, it's further proof that they're going to have people on the strings, just like George Bush is in the beginning of this, and Obama is in the beginning of this.
Well, to move on to the next scene, which is a very popularly broke down scene regarding a classroom setting and this girl who's holding an apple. This is the first time you see her, and of course this is where you get a good glimpse of the same symbol on her cheek, just like you had on the bomber cheek. And you see another eclipse symbol there. Of course, on the top left, behind the third child, who's kind of sitting there with his hands together in a triangle, very reminiscent of how Donald Trump sits, very commonly. Yeah. Whenever Donald Trump is sitting, he holds his hand like that, and of course the hair is very just obvious on this character, so that seems to be a very Donald Trump-like trait. Putting that out there, but behind its head is a buck figure, and this is the first time this comes into view when watching this video. And this buck is going to give us an identifying characteristic of this bunny rabbit that's over to the right in the top right corner. And this bunny rabbit is, if it's a male bunny rabbit, then it is also known as a buck. And this is going to come into play later because there's happens during the year called the buck moon. In the classroom, you have these 12 blue-like figures. And wrapping around them, there is a good amount of barbed wire. Of course, in 2020, the first instances that we can maybe try to associate is the coronavirus lockdowns. And so we can see that it really wasn't until January, February, March, and April that people started to have to go into the first phase lockdowns. And of course, if we look at this to explain the astrological signs that are kind of identifying 2020 with this picture. It might sound like nonsense, but bear with me. Let me walk you through it. So, if we were to number the children, starting with the back row and then moving to the row that is in the front, we would go January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, ending with these two conjoined twins. Moving to the front row with this kid sitting, September, and in between September and this next figure kind of cupping their face, it would be October, November, and then following December on the very far bottom right corner. So this, if we look at it in terms of the 2017 calendar, places this little girl with possibly a moon picture at her feet, and it would line up right when the September great sign in the sky happened, the Revelation 12 sign that many people talked about in 2017. And of course, there was also a solar eclipse that happened. So you have both in August and then following in September the varying signs of 2017. So if we were to then jump and apply this same concept to the 2020 calendar, however, counting through these different children chronologically, let's start on the bottom left-hand corner, January, February, March, April, May, June, and you have this buck moon rabbit signal that comes down what would be the very first portion there of July. And so this is where the buck moon fell. This just passed a weekend or two ago in terms of when we're publishing this video. But this buck moon and this solar eclipse that is represented by this girl is two symbols that we're going to be breaking down and how they're reoccurring themes throughout some other pop culture media. I'm going to be talking about how an episode of The Simpsons is actually what I believe to be part 1.
The Simpsons.
For centuries, man has been ruled by science and industry, but that era is drawing to a close. We stand on the cusp of a new epoch, one of prophecy, puzzles, and signs in the sky. And that epoch begins today.
Our top story, today Springfield will experience a rare total eclipse of the sun. A solar eclipse is like a woman breastfeeding in a restaurant. It's free, it's beautiful, but under no circumstances should you look at it. We recommend using a homemade camera obscura, fashioned from an ordinary shoebox and paper towel tube. This was supposed to be pre-made. Fine, I'll do it myself. Where's the end of the freaking tape? Forget it, we'll do it next week.
The eclipse is today.
There's an eclipse when I say there's an eclipse!
Okay, people, we've hit penumbra. Brace yourself for umbra. I'm gonna see it first.
If they put all of the symbology that they could, then these two things would turn out to be part 1 and part 2 for me. And of course, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that Simpsons episode shortly. But so the girl and her placement, chronologically, if you were considering the children as months, would land on June 21st, Father's Day, and that is also the day that an annular eclipse happened. And I'm going to show how some other pop culture references the necessity to pay attention to the first full moon following an annular eclipse.
Legend and Wikipedia have it that the gem will be revealed during the first full moon after a solar eclipse.
That's tonight.
Duh. One question remains. Why did you come here?
And this very particular combination seems to be indicating these New World Order agendas being fastly moved forward and implemented, and so that's the significance of some of the things we're going to be talking about in relation to, hey, this is all culminating in the revelation of the Antichrist, in my opinion. Yeah. And that's why we're being watching on the wall and talking about it.
I did notice when I was watching it, if you look at the heads of the blue figures, the way they're all pitted, it's like they're letting you know they're moons. They look like moons. And in the Bible, it refers to the months. You know your months by the moon. So it feels like that's a explicit, these are moons, and it's a timeline. This is the subversion of this kind of video. It's so cloaked that you can tell they're they have a tongue they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth when they make it.
Well, let me go ahead and read you this verse and maybe help people that are looking from the outside in or aren't very familiar with certain biblical prophetic concepts. In Psalms 2, it says, "Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heaven shall laugh, and the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure." And it's definitely a conspiratorial premise that's being set forth here, that we need to be aware that in the end times, this whole Antichrist affair, a personified Antichrist, because I believe that there's been Antichrist throughout history, people stepping into this role that Satan has used to further his agendas. But, of course, we have this concept in the scripture of 8 Antichrists and certain cryptic riddles being said about these 8 Antichrists that are going to manifest throughout history. And then, of course, the 8th being of the 7, which I believe could tie to a little bit of research I've been doing on the first representation of the Antichrist in the Bible. Now, my current belief is that Cain, who slew Abel, is the first example of what could be considered an Antichrist spirit manifesting in the world. And that's what I'm going to tie to certain symbology that we later see in this cartoon that seem to be also tied to these 8 lotus flowers that I see parallel with these 8 Antichrists that are supposed to be appearing throughout history. And so, talking about Cain, we have many aspects of his life that parallel what we see with the Antichrist in the book of Revelation. We have a mark that is on his head. You have this premise of he can't be killed. You also have those who receive his mark. The book of Revelation talks about those who receive his mark seek death, but death eludes them, which is very synonymous language to what promise was given to Cain. And I know there's many theories out there, some that perhaps Nimrod is the first true rebellious one who exemplifies the Antichrist, but all of these people share traits throughout history. I mean, you could draw Antichrist traits out of Hitler. You could draw Antichrist traits out of certain Caesars that ruled over Rome during the time of the early first century believers. There's many Antichrists throughout history. Augustus Epiphanius. I'm saying that incorrectly. Maybe you can correct me.
2 John 1:7 says, "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh, or Yeshua HaMashiach. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist." So it seems like he lets us know it's a spirit that will infect many.
Yeah, and I want to say right off the bat, 1 John is very clear that the spirit of Antichrist was even then in the world, and Christ is very clear: if you are not for me, you are against me. And I came to that realization whenever I first started hearing God's call in my life. I realized that if I had lived my life in a Antichrist fashion, in the way that I denied what Christ had done, and the way that I walked out my life did not reflect Him as my Savior. And so in a unconscious way, I was working for the kingdom of Satan, just by being a sinful man and going my rebellious route. And in the same way, I think people that produce cartoons like this or predictive programs, perhaps it's just a spiritual thing that's being manifested in their creative work because they don't have that heart that has been changed by Yahushua. And anyways, moving on.
Do me a favor real quick. Tip your head up so I can see the right to your left. No, other left. Sorry, I forgot everything's backwards. I want to see those ringed reflections because I want to make a point with them, or in your glasses. Okay. You see the two rings, how they overlap, making okay, on the left one, the Bible says that no man can serve two masters. And I think that we have the realm of Yah, the quantum realm of Yah, and the quantum realm of the devil, and we live in the overlap. It's still only two.
Yeah.
The devil has spent his life with gnosis and Christ consciousness, self-worship, to try to convince us humans that there is a third kingdom, ours. And if he can get us to worship ourselves, we are automatically worshiping him. That is Antichrist. There is Christ and Antichrist, and if he can get us anywhere away from the Christ, then you're now on the spirit of Antichrist in that.
You know, your explanation of the kingdom of darkness versus the kingdom of Yah, and how they're an inverse of the other, is really interesting because there is a mathematical equation that's on the wall behind Bush there, and it says F equals negative F, as if to infer, So I think that kind of can tie into this below premise that at least the Kabbalists and the Illuminati and whoever these secret society types implement in all of their iconography.
Yeah. Interesting, before we move on from the little girl in the classroom, this is a sidebar, and if Nate Reynolds, you end up seeing this, you're the one that kind of told me about the information that this makes me think of. This little girl is sitting at the feet of Obama in that classroom. She drops her apple and it rolls over by Obama's foot, which then you have the eclipse again, and it looks like an L, but if you follow the lines between the tiles, it looks like it makes an A. Do you see it?
Yes.
Which Antichrist. Now, I'm not saying Obama's the Antichrist. However, if you look under Obama's foot, there is a coin there. And there is, and among the dark kingdom, there is certain coins that you get, or talismans, that grant you wishes, or not like Genie in the Bottle wishes, but like you can request favors and exchange your coin. Or if you are murdered, they will take your coin. They're assassinated, they'll take your coin back to the person that they assassinated you for. And that makes me think of it. I was not able to distinguish what's on it. It's so faint, but I found it super interesting that it's under there.
It almost looks like a crown, interestingly enough. It looks like a royal crown, like one of those
it does.
goofy looking crown.
Yeah, the crown underneath the feet. Huh.
And so the AC is definitely an interesting point that you bring out there, standing for Antichrist, because it does tie to what bursts forth from the apple of the lotus flower, which I'm going to go ahead and put on screen now and show that there is a sculpture, a medieval Catholic church has this sculpture of an Antichrist child bursting forth from a lotus flower, crushing what looks to be a lamb. And the lamb's legs seem to be tied. And this is reminiscent of what we saw at the very beginning of the video, with the goat being behind wires and kind of in what looks to be like a concentration camp or some kind of a prison. And so this Antichrist figure is associated with this lotus flower in a lot of symbols throughout history. And I'm going to just show that picture with the Catholic Church. Now, the significance, I think, also of the L, and I wanted to break this down because it's a new revelation, kind of looking at this video that I had, and of course I might be wrong, so I reserve the right to be inaccurate on this, but I've not heard anybody with this perspective before on any of the videos we've reviewed. And so this L shape, I believe, is associated with the sign that follows the buck moon. And so I'm going to explain this. Of course, we have what looks to be moon symbology, a crescent moon. You have the L, and this is following this apple that rolls from the arms of a girl who definitely represents the moon. And so for all these reasons, I had this L shape in my mind, and the other day I looked up into the sky, and it was July 5th, the early morning hours of July 5th, and I looked up into the sky, and there was what appeared to be an L shape in the same configuration as this thing that's painted on the ground. And I find that very peculiar because I was aware of the importance of the July 5th date. Later on, I'm going to show you guys, or maybe I'll pull it up on screen now, how there's a 5 and a 7 over top of this oil field on the screen now is basically a signifier for an important date. And of course, you see over here on the right side of the screen a cloud that looks very akin to a bunny rabbit, which also ties back to this buck moon symbology. And this 7-5 date is fascinating because that's the night I saw this. And on screen now, you're going to see the moon and what appears to be two lights forming a very kind of bentward sideways L shape. Now, this L shape is the same shape that we see kind of scribbled on the floor. And what I would later eventually come to think is the mark of Cain, or at least the same shape as what could be identified as the mark of Cain. Now, in doing some research about what the mark of Cain is, we can see the supernatural guise. Of course, this is the first thing that popped up when I looked for the mark of Cain. And this image is strikingly similar to the same shape painted on the floor and also in the night sky on the evening of July 5th. This planet and star formed what appears to be this L shape in the sky. It also looks like an upside-down pyramid, which is used recurrently throughout this cartoon. And it also looks like what is a birthmark on the cheek of this Antichrist figure at the end of the video. And the significance that I'm going to bring out about this is there is a song. I'm going to have to find the song here real quick, Tony.
Actually, it's Mars is the Red Planet, which is interesting, tied in with all the Gaia stuff, because what they teach in New Age, I could not even make this up. They teach that there was a race of entities that lived on Mars, and a group of them decided to do an experiment. And they called this experiment the Lucifer Experiment. And what they did was they cut themselves from the red cord, which we know the symbology of that in Scripture, with it being Yeshua. They cut themselves with the red cord, which set them cut them off from the collective empathy, which then they started becoming greedy. So then they got kicked off of Mars and sent to, and ended up coming to Earth. And so now you have the two divisions where the fallen group from Mars is trying to keep men's Christ consciousness lower, and we only have a certain amount of time to get it to the next, back up to the next level. Because we fell, they convinced us to fall too when they got sent here. It's the craziest thing. It's like, are you reading Genesis? Is that what you're doing? Like, are you twisting? Like, it's insane. We should probably do a show on that.
Okay, here's the song that I was talking about that has significant ties to this whole birthmark and signs in the sky. It's the song First We Take Manhattan, and it's by Leonard Cohen. And if you look up the lyrics, you can see on screen now, it says, "They sentenced me to 20 years of boredom for trying to change the system from within. I'm coming now, I'm coming to reward them. First we take Manhattan, then we take Berlin. I'm guided by a signal in the heavens. And I'm guided by this birthmark on my skin."
Wow. That's crazy.
Take Manhattan, and of course we have all the Statue of Liberty symbology in this cartoon.
Yeah.
First we take Manhattan, and then we take Berlin, and of course I'm going to show you guys how this episode of The Simpsons, titled "Gone Maggie Gone," is part one in what I believe is some type of occultic communication. Somebody put together this Simpsons episode, and they left an unfinished plot line, ending with Bart being sat on the throne of the Catholic Church as an Antichrist figure, and they left it unfulfilled. They didn't do a part two. They just left the end of the episode with Bart becoming the Antichrist. And I believe this iPet Go 2 episode is a direct response by, be it the powers that be or somebody who's just a lay person that was able to piece together all of these different symbols that have been prevalent in occult theology. And so I believe this iPet Goat is a response to this first premise put out by The Simpsons, which predicts the coming of an Antichrist. And, of course, we've already talked about how The Simpsons have a knack for being predictive in their programs, such as predicting Donald Trump becoming the president, predicting various other instances and technologies. So you guys are going to see some correlation there as I pull it up on the screen and show you guys how those tie together.
Real quick, you were just talking about Lady Liberty. We have Lady Liberty's torch falls off of her, and which I thought there's not really a lot else going on, so it seemed to be the point of the scene. And when you look up and see what Lady Liberty's torch means, it is Lady Liberty enlightening the world. The torch is a symbol of enlightenment. The Statue of Liberty's torch lights the way to freedom, showing us the path to liberty. So I find that interesting because if her torch is falling off, then it's basically saying you're really getting your liberties cut off and your enlightenment cut off, all under the guise of enlightening us.
Yeah, I find it interesting that at the beginning of that Simpsons episode, there's very explicit Antichrist end times promos kind of flashing on the screen, and the whole thing seems geared to setting up this Age of Aquarius, different themes running in the background of the episode. And interestingly enough, in the episode, it talks about how a lot of the prophecies regarding the coming of this figure, who ends up being Maggie, who eventually is replaced by Bart, the Antichrist figure, how this whole thing was tied to a Catholic nun that lived in the 1500s. And if you look up her name, She's an actual historical figure who, whenever I was reading through her Wikipedia page, I saw terms like levitated, and I don't know how accurate that is, but it's on Wikipedia, and this lady was named in the Simpsons episode. And my current thought is that she had a prophetic vision of the coming of an Antichrist figure.
I'm sorry, but I know God would never ask a mother to sacrifice her child for the good of the world. Again. Maybe I'm just being selfish. I don't know.
No, Marge, you're the most giving person I know. Besides, I gave them another gem child to sit on their precious throne.
Step aside, ladies. I'm bringing the peace. I am so staying up past my bedtime.
Playing out this timeline regarding this sign in the sky, the eclipse, and then followed by the first full moon, the buck moon after it, and then directly following this buck moon, you have this sign in the sky that looks like what is on the cheek of this Christ figure later on in the video. So, Tony, if maybe you could pull up this Christ figure, and I can point out this this symbol on his cheek that looks like this moon star formation forming an L, which is just seems to have appeared in the sky on July 5th, an important date recurring in this cartoon.
Yeah, this one. I mean, this is what I got. This is because it's part of something else I was doing. I would just say, yeah, that's it, and then talk about it, and then I'll put it up in editing.
Gotcha. Yeah. So this is what looks to be a moon-ish symbol and two stars side by side, making an L or almost an upside-down pyramid shape. This ties to some of the symbology behind the dollar and the Federal Reserve, which we know has dark ties to Illuminati, Bilderberger-type groups, the Rothschild family, who has been pushing the federal banking system to control the world and has been the enemy of multiple presidents, all of which have lost their heads, and they all ended up on one of the varying notes, such as Andrew Jackson, who had written on his tombstone, "I killed the bank," and as if to mock him, his head ended up on their currency, which is just funny to me.
That's hilarious.
Moving on, we're going to see Obama standing over this lotus flower, nervous at what I believe to be a revelation of this final Antichrist figure, who is this Christ consciousness replica Jesus is tied to lotus flowers later on in the video, being birthed out of this church vaginal canal, and of course the head of Satan over it, representing what I think would be the father of this Antichrist figure. And so, moving frame by frame, we can now see the camera come out of the classroom, and you see written on the wall there what is scribbled in a very strange way, Psalms 23. And this is, of course, the famous, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil" verse. And if you look closely and draw a line, and I'm going to do this to demonstrate, draw a line using the top of the S as an O and the top of the P as a D, you can see written on the wall, Donald. And I'm going to kind of highlight how you can read the D-O-N-A, the M being an A, then L-D. And this is just fascinating because I had actually originally wondered if this little cartoon was predictive in terms of Trump's presidency, because it did come out in 2013. And, of course, you have two instances. Of course, that first guy who's sitting in a very Trump-esque pose, and Donald scribbled hidden, but behind this very oddly written Psalms 23 on the wall. So
I think it's interesting that they have the lightning bolt, which is referred to as the enemy who fell as lightning from heaven, and the verse talking about walk through the shadow of death and not fearing evil, sort of like a I will rise again, a resurrection sort of thing, which I find super coincidental in quotation marks.
So as we're moving on, we can see the American flag enter into frame. It seems to be torn in half. And this is significant because earlier this year in 2020, the largest American flag on the continent apparently tore in half from wind shear. And so this happened while apparently Obama was visiting a high school. And I'm going to pull up this article here showing the flag carrying and also Obama's presence encouraging the graduates of the 2020 year. He did all these high school campaigns, appearing in high schools, and encouraging kids in schools in a similar way to what we saw with, I guess, Bush reading this I Pet Goat book directly before the 9/11 attacks, which brings us to what next is coming to frame. You have what is definitely a Twin Towers icon showing these two towers burning, and almost direct mimicry to how what planes flew into them, the two towers. And over on the left hand, before I skip over it, you have the midnight clock. The clock is set at midnight, so you have the doomsday clock, and if the clock hits midnight, we're here. And I think also in this we have what is evidence of a natural disaster, or perhaps man-made, but water seems to be flooding this whole area. You have this fence going down into the water. It seems to be like this whole area is like submerged. But all of this tying to what I would say is a possible 9/11 reboot.
Yeah.
You get it in the very name of the video, I Pet Goat 2, and that's what the book. That is the book that George W. Bush was reading when he got the announcement that the World Trade Centers had been hit. And if this is I Pet Goat 2, and there is going to be another false flag style attack, could it be possibly around the months of September? Perhaps it's going to be closer to the election. Who knows? We're not going to make exact date guesses or prophetic, exclamations, but all of this definitely is pointing to something in 2020 tied to false flags. Literally, Bush in the classroom says, "Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you." And he does the magic fingers and pointing at people.
It says, "Can't be fooled again."
Yeah, it's just crazy, man.
While we're at this spot, the next scene, as it's panning out from the Twin Towers, it keeps panning out, and it has this character standing here, and he jumps in the water. Now, this is gonna kind of like, I'm gonna show, this character keeps reoccurring through this. I'm gonna go through his occurrences, and then we'll come back. That way it sort of solidifies who this character is as we go. He ends up just coming up like that, and then he has a mask on. And he shows up again later in this, same character, different mask, and he's gray, which makes me think of the Greys, alien, which, as what we know, would be fallen angels, fallen entities. So he's masking. He shows up again as Callie. At first, I didn't think they were the same, but then I noticed on Callie's feet are the same raccoon tail tassels. So it's a thief. Raccoons are like little thieves, and he is the father of lies and a thief. And so he is Callie, and then changes his mask again to this. And he has a star on there. That's what we know stars as being angelic beings. Changes his mask again into this Doctor Who, or one of those pro-doctor masks.
The plague mask.
That's it, yeah, the plague mask. And then changes it again to here, which I think this is his mask revealed, because I don't see a mask, and this is the first time it kind of shows him without it. It feels like he took it off. Which then it cuts to directly after the scene, it zooms in on his face, and then zooms in on this face and starts panning out. So we'll get to what's happening in this situation, but this, I believe this character here is the fallen angels who are behind the scenes, sort of dancing as this charade plays out, as this storyline plays out, what they want to happen happens.
To me, it seems like the practice of ritual magic.
Yeah.
Of the ceremony.
Yep.
Then correlated with the birth of this Antichrist.
Yes, exactly.
Consciousness. And so whatever ritual this dancing figure is, which is very reminiscent of Shiva, that's out in front of CERN, of course, the dancing god, and they have the weird dance that I'll show you guys here of the ritual of the dance of destruction, basically, that they even played out at CERN, which is, it's like literally the same dance that we're seeing this cartoon character dancing, and then it wrapping up with the plague mask is directly possibly tied to the COVID-19 virus thing that's being pushed today. And so all of these very interesting, and then of course it cuts to the birth of this Antichrist figure, who of course we can talk a little bit about.
The birth is actually really interesting. Here's a side shot. They threw our buddy Osama bin Laden, in here, and if you look closely, he's wearing the CIA patch. So it's sort of like it's a Easter egg for us. Earlier in it, I found this interesting. It shows this picture of a praying child. He's got his hands in the praying symbol. And it sort of rotates and zooms out, and it is an egg that is held by this machine here. Yes, there he is. And if you look at the writing on the bottom, it took me a while to figure out what it was saying, because it sort of keeps dancing all over. It says Ab-Ch. I thought it said Ab-Chance, which I looked up Ab-Chance, and Ab-Chance is a telecommunications company that does business as Hubble Incorporated. So I thought I was on something there, but then I realized it's later on that it says Ab, and you see the CH, and then CH, and then this is. It took me so long. They wouldn't show the AO for Ab-Chow, ABCHAO, which means out of chaos. But they show it in one frame without the rest of the sentence, without the rest of the phrase. So underneath this eye, in this TV screen, connected to a snake wrapped around an egg, and here we have the definition of Ab-Chow. It is order out of chaos. It's a 33rd degree thing, and it's an accepted path of the Masons. It's sort of a Hegelian dialectic sort of thing. But this snake and the egg is actually very interesting. The ancient symbol of the serpent coiled around an egg was originally attributed to the mythical founder of the Orphic Mysteries, Orpheus. It was a religion centered on teachings of the origin of life, procreation, immortality, mortality, creativity, and wisdom. It is the emblem of the Logoi, or the self-born, the Gnostic Christian who are reborn again into the immortal light of their own gnosis. Which, if you translate gnosis to knowledge or knowing, this is basically the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This is getting people to worship themselves, their Christ consciousness, this self-born. If you are quote unquote the Christ, then and you have to die to come back, you are self-born. It is not the real Messiah. It is putting a person's place in the stead of the Messiah, which then renders them an Antichrist. The egg and the snake show up later here as the Antichrist figure is entering the fallopian tube / birth canal, but we will get to that part here in a little bit.
Now, it's also got a lot of similar characteristics to the Matrix, with people that are in the eggs there in the Matrix films, which also have a lot of underlying commentary on the world today and just the system of mind control and secrecy and brainwashing that goes into keeping people in the system. Yeah. And so, of course, the person in the egg is right along those same lines, which I believe, of course, tapping into AI and connecting our brains to a digital system is another avenue for, plugging into the beast system. And we got to be very conscious of virtual reality things and plugging into our brains into like Elon Musk style interfaces from the brain into like an AI computer. Because we have talked about in the past, Tony, how Siri and Bixby and Cortana, all of these digital assistants are a replacement of the Holy Spirit. And then if it gets to the point where they're actually in our brains telling us what to do, where to go, what to think, then it truly is almost a replacement Holy Spirit.
It's an unholy spirit.
It's an unholy spirit tied into an AI supercomputing system. And go ahead.
I feel that if this realm we live in, is a spiritual construct that appears physical. This is how you move mountains, walk on water, turn 5 loaves and 3 fish, right? Is it 5 loaves and 3?
5 loaves and 2 fish.
Okay, if you can turn that to feed 5,000, like this place is a spiritual place, and so to have a physical object obtain a sort of consciousness in a spiritually built world is not possible. I feel as if it is a bridge for the fallen entities to speak to us without us going, hey, where'd that voice come from? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of the people that are tapping into occult practices, rituals, trying to communicate through seances, they are able to tap into some of these spiritual concepts that are being propagated, and they're perhaps being mediums for fallen angels or demons, and they're basically giving us the playbook in the same way that God says, I will do nothing unless I reveal it first to my prophets.
Yeah.
Perhaps the enemy of our souls is also tied to that same rule, and kind of reveal the game plan before they can actually do it. And so, moving on in the video, of course, we have Osama bin Laden and the CIA symbol on his shirt. You see up in the sky, of course, another eclipse, partial eclipse, and that's likened to the symbol of Islam, the crescent moon, of course, tied to the Islamic, extreme terrorism that Osama bin Laden and ISIS and other groups that have eventually been tied to American funding, which is suspect, of course. Of course, looking at all the issues with 9/11, 3 towers fell. You had a massive engineers guild publish a paper on how World Trade Center Building 7 absolutely was a controlled demolition. And when you have all these different kind of issues with the official story, the airplane that flew into the Pentagon, just all of the nuances to the conspiracy, this video really has a lot of things that pop out to me as revealing truth behind some of those conspiracies that have been way back since 2001. People have been talking about some of the issues with 9/11 and how false flags have been used to draw people into wars in the Middle East and historically just justify wars in general. So, Tony, I don't know if you want to maybe make any more comments, but I'm now looking at this scene of the Statue of Liberty on top of what looks to be a Star of David, a Star of David symbol.
Yeah.
And there's close ties with the United States and Israel, of course. And so as you move on to see the Statue of Liberty crumble, there's definitely a process in 2020 that is tied to this symbology of the United States crumbling, and all these interesting things happening. Later on, we're going to see in the eyes, we're going to see, okay, this Christ figure approaching, his burning heart, which is...
I have something for that. This is like where he first makes his first appearance, and oddly enough, he makes it on this boat. It's an Egyptian Anubis boat, one-eyed being shown, which makes me think of all of the Hollywood.
Hollywood,
Yep.
craziness.
And then it has the burning heart on him, which people try to say it's the Sacred Heart, and it's his thing. I looked up. The flame within the heart is your personal focus of the sacred fire. It is your opportunity to become one with your higher self. You call it the Christ, the Buddha, the Tao, or the Atman. It is the potential of your divinity waiting to burst into being within your humanity. It is a Christ consciousness thing. People try to say that the burning heart is referring to how much he loved us, the passion of the Christ. But in occult stuff, that's not what it means. It's referring to Christ consciousness and the flame of that.
Yeah, and then as it pans up, you see on his forehead the all-seeing eye, underneath a pyramid, of course, all Egyptian symbology, and then it brings into scene this creepy head of a devil-like gray character, and his beard is actually a pyramid upside down, what you would see on the American dollar.
Yep.
The all-seeing eye pyramid. And this monetary figure is plugged into the head of this figure that I have now come to see as associated with Bart from that episode of The Simpsons. He literally has the spiked head, bro. He literally has the same spiked head as Bart, and in his eyes, and this is the additional insight for those of you who've been watching, waiting for the new revelation that I want to share with you guys. So this is why I believe the Simpsons episode Gone Maggie Gone is part 1 of this, and this is part 2, almost like a response and a finishing of the story timeline of this ushering in of the New World Age. So in his eyes, you can see markets plunge, okay? And it is in the eyes of this Bart figure. And now I am going to pull up for you guys something in the stock market known as the Bart. And this is some really, really shocking stuff. This has been happening over the past year since the great plunge that happened because of coronavirus. But you literally have a terminology in stock market trading called the Bart. And let me do a screen share here for you guys. Here's my screen, and here is stock market Barts. Look at this, bro. Do you see this instance of the upshooting market, and it comes over in the same shape as Bart's head? And there's Bart's butt. Sorry, guys. So, bottom line, I believe there is either a signal coming through the stock market, or perhaps a warning through the banking manipulators, the Bilderbergers, the Rothschilds. They are putting these BARTs in the stock market as a sign that change is coming, that the big reset is coming, and the World Economic Forum already has on their agenda the global reset set for January 2021. So what's going to happen between now and January 2021 where that agenda is actually going to be meaningful? Because in its current iteration, we're not going to have one world currency. But if the stock market crashes, if there is a global reset of the banks and the monetary system, then perhaps the Simpsons and iPetGoat 2 are warning us with these Simpson characters to look for the signs in the stock market, which I screen shared and showed you guys, these BART heads appearing as perhaps a warning of a bigger crash coming in the near future, or something else, maybe signaling, the ushering in of this Antichrist figure. But we know that the people that run the banks, the vast majority of them have ties to Satanism, to occultism, to the Illuminati, whatever you want to call it, because they come out and admit their involvement in these secret society groups. And so that's the significance of this BART correlation that I'm making in iPetGoat 2 and this episodes of The Simpsons where Antichrist. So,
interestingly enough, that character that is tied to the Bart character, he's even yellow. He's even got yellow paint on him.
Wow.
He comes from the third eye of the Antichrist in the scene. It goes from this scene where it's super close to him, focused on the third eye, and then it comes from that area and then goes into this. And this is the same serpent egg machine from the beginning. And so it goes back and forth from this face to that lizard eye. So it's basically saying the third eye of the Antichrist is the lizard eye. Not a literal lizard eye, but what we know of like a dragon. The eye of the dragon. Wow. And it has broken the minds of the people. This dude has a full egg head. If you look in the background, you can see the rest of his head. And it's broken his head and wound itself inside of it. It's sort of controlling the mind of it. Which then, if you're drawing the BART thing with the yellow, it could be controlling the markets as well.
Now, we know that historically the system of Babylon transplanted and was tied to early Egypt.
Yeah.
So there's direct correlations between the Babylonian political and monetary system, as well as the system of Egypt, and all of those correlate to here in the United States. And I don't have time to go into my personal theological beliefs of the United States in biblical prophecy, but suffice it to say that the daughter of Babylon and the daughter of Egypt and all the Egyptian symbology in our dollars and in our architecture, they all trace back to these ancient systems.
Yeah.
And that's why the symbology in these secret societies and on the dollar bill and in this video seem to be referring to Egypt, because I believe it's in reference to the United States, like we see here on the picture behind me. This video is about the United States for the most part.
Scripture says there's nothing new under the sun, so it hasn't changed. Since the beginning, it is Babylon, Egypt concept, and Israel. Like not the what we call Israel, the actual place. Those in covenant with Abba through his son. That it is the people of Israel and the people of Egypt, Babylonian, that mysticism, and it hasn't changed. It's still the same. It's come out of her, my people. And so it's not just going to just suddenly have a new ring to it 4,000 years later. There's nothing new under the sun. It's the same old thing. Just come out of pagan traditions, out of pagan systems, and be in the world, but not of it.
And the symbology behind the Whore of Babylon and the apostate church is going to doubly come into play later on in this video.
Yeah.
You can see basically this old hag inside of a phallus topped by a cross, a steeple. And this seems to be the building that the Antichrist is birthed out of, this church building. And so, to move on back to the very next scene, of course, we have these jets that seem to be like American-style bomber jets. Would be a mosque.
That's not what I saw. The Masonic Square and Compass and alien craft.
Okay, well, I mean, there's definitely. I would say that I do see the Masonic sign. I didn't look at it closely, but I mean, they're fighter jets that look like flying Mason signs.
And they fly across and they bomb this building. It's a mosque. It has the moon on top.
Yeah.
Which then, interesting, the next scene is a top view, and you have my first thought was the smoke from the bottomless pit, and you have these creatures flying out of where it was hit. I think they're either blackbirds or bats, one or the other.
They do look a lot like bats. And I'm going to have to do another overlay, but I believe this city, this Islamic, mosque city, has similar characteristics to either Mecca or Medina. So I'm going to have to pull up some side-by-side pictures and compare this place with Mecca and see if it seems to be the same kind of city skyline, similar look. Moving on, we see the Christ figure kind of holding a butterfly, and the butterfly is the symbol of rebirth. And of course, this whole thing is about the birthing of this figure.
You saw a butterfly, huh? That's very interesting. Yeah. I thought it was a moth, like a Luna moth.
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess it could be a moth as well.
Go into what you were saying about the butterfly, and I'll cover the moth, and maybe it's both. Who knows?
Butterflies are the symbol of rebirth. Of course, you have the butterfly going into the cocoon and then emerges later as this different creature. And you have also this Antichrist figure kind of being birthed within the church and then coming out, and then the church being destroyed behind him. So a very butterfly-esque transformation in the merging. So what did you get out of it with the moth?
I thought it was a moth because it catches on fire and burns and is gone. It's just like this moth lands on butterfly, but more moth lands on his finger and burns and is gone. And the moth represents in spiritual terms that we must focus on the correct direction, and we must not allow others to transform us. Throughout history, many people believe that moths came from our own spirit guide to represent that we must follow a certain path in life. Often, the Luna moth is associated with an increase in spirituality and power. So when you put that definition, not letting other people direct us, and it burns, it's gone. It's saying, I will direct you now. That's how I saw it. But, I mean, the butterfly makes a sense, too.
Oh, wow. With anything, I feel like there's multiple layers behind this whole thing. I mean, even now, looking at the shape of the flame that comes off, it almost looks like a fox or some type of creature, just how you pause the video. So there's no telling what we've missed. Of course, we're just kind of adding to the things that we've researched and heard from others.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's more kind of insight to be drawn out of this. All right, so moving on, we have a scene that is Isis and Horus Now, this is also likened to Mary and baby Jesus in the Catholic Church, and the several other theologies. There's various Madonna figures throughout different religions, and so I don't believe this is Mary and Jesus. I think it's Isis and Horus, and of course in the background you see a nuclear explosion.
Yep. If you look up the Black Madonna, not African American Madonna, the Black Madonna, like the color, or the Black Virgin. Intentionally, hundreds of icons of Mary have black faces and hands. In France, they are called Vierge Noire, or Black Virgins. In other countries, they are called Black Madonnas. Some call her the Other Mary, which is pretty telling. Jung said she is Isis, while others consider her to be iconic remains of prehistoric Mother Earth worship. She is linked with Cybele and Demeter, Diana and Artemis, Isis, and Venus Aphrodite. Cross-culturally, she is associated with Kali, which we saw her in here too.
Yeah.
She is associated with... Where did that go? Such small writing. She was Kali, Iena, and Lilith. Historically, she has ties to the Crusades and the Moorish occupation of Spain to the conquistadors who brought her to the New World. So this is, and it is manifest in consciousness, and like the essence that she represents, follows the guidance of the inner voice, the real master, or the cosmic Christ within. So we're back to Christ consciousness again, with the false, the evil, the other side of the coin of the Jesus' mother. We have the pagan Antichrist mother.
And I think you're right on with that. I think the whole story of Isis and Set, or in the Babylonian context, it would be Semiramis and Tammuz, and this is also associated with where we get the holiday Easter.
Your mic again.
Mic test.
There we go.
So this ties back also to the Babylonian history with Semiramis and Tammuz, which in our scripture we can see this verse that talks about the weeping for Tammuz, and there's some interesting correlations with Easter and Astaroth being another form of the name of Semiramis, who also was deified as Isis and the Egyptian lord. So this figure, I believe, is a precursor to the birth of this Antichrist figure. Of course, Tammuz being deified, and also throughout all these different religions, perhaps it was all predictive programming for the Black Madonna. The Mary, the Antichrist, the woman that would birth into the world the opposite and the evil one who comes to steal the souls of mankind instead of coming to redeem us. The lawless one, wherein, in contrast, Christ obeyed the law and was righteous to death, and obedient until death. And so,
I have an interesting sidebar here. It correlates in this sense. The devil himself is trying to make himself like the Most High, but he won't do it. You can't do it correctly. There is no correct way to do it other than submission. And he won't do that, so he's trying to replicate the mathematical formula in the reverse. So we have the, some people believe they're sapphire. We have Moses' tablets. Well, they have tablets. They have the emerald tablets of Thoth. We have the Messiah. They have the anti-Messiah. We have Mary. They have Lilith and Isis. He keeps trying to create this other side, which, interestingly enough, I remember being in high school or junior high, and they're teaching us the negative, the number line, the negative side, and my brain could not grasp it because I'm sitting there going, that's not a real thing. You can't have negative something. It's the center point of a number line. It can't be zero. You're out of numbers then.
Yeah.
You can't. There's no such thing as negative numbers. Which, interestingly enough, algebra, calculus, all of those is based on that, having a negative numbers, which perhaps our globe Earth math is based on. But I digress. The center point should be 1, and then you have fractions. You know what I mean? Where it's still sum, it's division and multiplication, and so that ties into he keeps having his own inversed counterfeit that he's putting up.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely some themes that we can get out of this is it's revealing the counterfeit of a lot of things. So you're revealing these false flags, which are counterfeits. You're revealing the apostate church represented later on in this whore figure in a church steeple. That's a counterfeit of the true remnant of God. And so, of course, you have the Madonna, who is a counterfeit of Mary and Yeshua. And, of course, all of these seem to be put out in pop culture throughout the histories and different religions to muddy the waters and to draw away from the true prophetic redemptive story that was written in the stars with the Mazzaroth and that was revealed to us through the scriptures and the Messiah who was prophesied throughout the Hebraic times of the prophets, all leading up to the redemption of mankind with the true Messiah. And then, of course, you have the people who've sold their souls to the devil. You have the Illuminati who are waiting for this Antichrist figure to step onto the scene so that they can have their hour to shine. And so, moving on, you have the scarab symbol, of course, on this guy. There's a lot of interesting symbology with the scarab also.
I have some stuff with that. Here's the scarab. This is the child that's on the Black Madonna. And if you look up scarab in Egyptian, it was a symbol of immortality, resurrection, transformation, and protection, much used in funerary art. The life of the scarab beetle revolved around the dung balls that the beetles consumed, laid their eggs in, and fed their young, represented a cycle of rebirth. Which is interesting as they're laying their eggs into these balls of dung, which are clay and crap. So they feed us crap on TV and media, and then lay their eggs in us, and then they hatch and keep that cycle of rebirth within us going.
Yeah, just playing out their themes and their agendas in the media that they plant in the crap that is TV today.
Yeah.
So, moving on, of course, we have this interesting child warrior type figure. It kind of looks like a mannequin. And there's just interesting things there. You got a hammer and sickle and this guy who is kind of being sucked under this slime pit.
Dude, what did you get from this? I could not understand this. I see hammer and sickle. I think of communism. The only other clue I even saw in there was his tattoo says Juanita something, which I didn't even think of looking it up. Let me see. Definition of Juanita. Oh. It means God is gracious.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man.
And
that's crazy.
On his cheek, once again, reoccurring is this symbol for the astrological sign of the annular eclipse. And I didn't get a chance to read it, and I wanted to earlier, but in Jeremiah 10, we learned that the kings and the nations look for signs in the sky. And it says in Jeremiah 10, "Hear ye the word which the Lord speaketh unto you, O house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth the tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers that it move not. They're upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. Neither also is it in them to do good. So we know, of course, through most ancient cultures, a worship of the solstices and a worship practice tied to these astronomical signs in the sky, such as the autumn and spring equinoxes, and the solstices, the summer and winter solstice, and of course the annular eclipse that happened in 2020 landed on July 21st, and this was a annular eclipse that landed on Father's Day, and this is the only time since 2001 that an annular eclipse has landed on Father's Day. And you can look at that timeline and what happened after the annular eclipse in 2001. We have the attack in September 9/11, and perhaps if this iPad Go 2 is signaling a second false flag attack, a liken to 9/11. I mean, all of these symbols and icons and different images seem to be pointing to 2020. And, you can draw certain aspects of 2017 and the symbol of the Revelation 12 sign that many people, that they woke up to the reality of prophetic signs in the sky. And perhaps this is just another example of the occult looking forward to this sign in the sky that signifies they need to move forward with some dastardly plan.
I would like to interject something here. If anybody's watching with their children right now, the section we're about to get into with this Whore of Babylon representing person in this very phallic tower has some stuff, even though it's cartoon, might not be suitable for children. So just tell them to go get a snack. But this part coming up, where we are introduced, this is where the Antichrist figure is moving towards on his boat. This is above the cave or fallopian tube or birth canal, whatever you want to call it, that he enters. And if you don't see what I see, I don't know what you're looking at, but it's very phallic. It's very phallic in nature. So much so that they zoom in and you get your first glimpse of the face of the whore, and she is inside, and they literally have like white stains coming out of the windows. A rock slide comes off the top that doesn't look like rocks the way it moves. It looks more like a fluid. But
the regenerative member showing the impregnation of this Antichrist figure or whatever is happening, because you see later the rocks falling in that cave that this Antichrist is then later birthed out of, and these rocks, of course, symbolizing lack of any other way we can put it, ejaculate. And so this woman is representing to me the whoring church, the system of Christianity today that is talked about perhaps in Ezekiel 22. They've hid their eyes from God's Sabbath. They've not taught the difference between the unclean and the clean. They've changed his holy ways. They've hidden their eyes from his law, and they've made a prophet of the whole guise of Christianity. And basically, church steeples directly tie back to the phallus symbol. And a lot of Christians don't know that. And if you're watching this video, church steeples are basically reiterations of the ancient Egyptian obelisk. And that's exactly what is being very clearly demonstrated in this cartoon. Obviously, the creators knew about the whole phallus association with church steeples.
Interesting thing what we were talking about with the whore, the church whore, basically monetizing the gospel. If the gospel is about Yeshua and he is love, then to charge people for love is prostitution. It is whoring, like at the most base level. And so it's this. We have her inside this, and this is where it gets a little graphic. First, I'm gonna back up just a little bit. This is where he first enters into underneath this. Actually, no, this comes after. So you see the phallic tower. We're introduced to the whore that's in there. Then the Antichrist figure riding his Egyptian canoe comes into this birth canal, riding on the water. While he's riding, a bunch of fish start jumping out of the water into the boat. And when I think of, in this whole regenerative context, little swimmers, I'm still thinking of ejaculate in that sense. And so he carried... What'd you say?
Just another perspective is followers, of course, this is a very biblical type thing, fish jumping out of water into the boat.
Yeah.
And in biblical context, the apostles are called fishers of men. And so in this context, I could see these fish representing followers jumping into this boat with the Antichrist mindset, joining leagues and becoming, fanboys or followers of the Antichrist system.
Maybe that's why they're wearing jail clothes, the black and white stripes.
Very interesting.
Because they're imprisoned. So he does this boat. Then it cuts to, this is where it gets even weirder. This poor lady, she starts getting pushed back by the light. This seems very rapish, and then all of a sudden, she's spotting, so she knows she's not pregnant. It disappears, letting you know she is no longer able to have her menstrual cycle, indicative of pregnancy. So I'm not going to leave these up for that long.
Yeah.
There, but
definitely the symbols behind an immaculate conception type deal. But this is not the biblical one. This is the immaculate conception of this Antichrist figure that is later birthed out of the church system.
Yes. And this is super evil. Now we've caught up to the point where I was going through that gray entity that kept changing his mask, and then ended up with his head above this entrance. It keeps zooming out, and the Antichrist figure is birthed. The water breaks behind him. The Antichrist figure is birthed out into this area, which after about 4 frames, he backs out, and this church building is behind him. This church building crumbles. We have freeze-framed this church building and the Notre Dame tower falling. They are almost identical.
Yeah, and as you see this Antichrist figure being birthed out of that canal, you see, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lotus flowers in the water.
Yep.
And this is a liken to the verses that talk about the 8 antichrists that will rise their heads throughout history. And I think this is just a video. This cartoon is really all about the birthing of this central character, this Antichrist, Christ consciousness figure. And it's out of the church system, which is interesting. Another concept that I want to point out, we skipped over this scene, but we're going to go back to it. It's this girl who's standing in front of these tanks waving a peace flag. Yeah. And this is, of course, likened to a very famous historical scene of a protester in a square, squaring off against some tanks. And we can see some traits about this girl. She's wearing a lion or a tiger, sorry, on her back, a decal. And this is an Asian associated figure. Of course, China comes to mind with tigers. You turn and see her face, and she does seem to have kind of Asian characteristics. On her face, you have the nuclear symbol crossed out, of Japan, and the whole nuclear spill into the Gulf from the Fukushima meltdown, and how nuclear waste was basically wasted. And you have the protests that have been going on in Hong Kong, which this seems to be a protest. And then, of course, on the ground, you see an interesting astrological sign. It seems to be what looks like some type of small planet-looking thing passing in front of the sun. And before the Day of the Dead, which this character who pops up behind her seems to be like a character right out of some of the Day of the Dead artwork, the different skeleton figures that are celebrated during that festival. This sign in the sky is going to happen before the Day of the Dead. I believe it's either Mercury or Mars is going to pass in front of the sun a few days preceding the Day of the Dead this year in 2020. So could this be pointing to some type of protest-style event leading up in the days prior to that Day of the Dead festival? I don't know, but it's interesting.
That is interesting. I was having trouble trying to figure out what that one meant. I was hoping you. It looks like that character would go under the name Skullduggery. I'll pull up some pictures. It seems like everywhere you type in Skullduggery, and it's pretty much that same kind of concept. We'll put some pictures up here. All right, so fast forward to after the lotus flowers, and he is riding out of the cave entrance, the birthing canal. He is being born. At that point is the first time. Let's see. Where'd it go? Thought I had him. Okay, here they are. It's the first time his eyes open. His eyes are shut the whole time, up until the point where he is birthed out of this canal. Then his eyes open. So it's an awakening, a birth and awakening, which I found really interesting.
And on his cheek, of course, is another triangular symbol, which I think is tied to that whole song by Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
Where it says, "I'm guided by this birthmark on my skin, and I'm guided by a signal in the heaven." And once again, I think this is tied to that symbol that appeared on the evening of July 5th after the buck moon, which I'm going to play this clip from The Simpsons, where they literally say, "We're waiting for the first moon following the annular eclipse, and this is going to reveal some particular figure that will arise on the world scene." And then, of course, in the Simpsons episode, Bart steps up onto the throne of the Catholic Church, and representative of this Antichrist figure. That seems to then play out in iPad Go 2 with this iteration of an Antichrist figure being born out of the church, with the symbology. And you talk about how his eyes have been closed this whole time as if he was asleep. Well, it is this moment that he wakes up that the crown of thorns disappears from his head, as if to say that the identity of this figure is going to transform from a Jesus mimic to maybe fulfilling that, setting himself up in the Holy of Holies, declaring himself to be God, taking on that role of the Antichrist. And so, we're wrapping up towards the end of this video, and at the end of it, you see.
Can I interject two things while we're on that topic? The first one is, the song Hallelujah? Leonard Cohen also wrote that one. It's the same dude.
Wow.
And okay, so when the Antichrist figure, we'll call him AC Slater, comes out of this church building and the whole building crumbles, that makes me think of the verse 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. So he's going to come out of the church system, all of them, and then destroy them behind him, so he could put himself in the place of it, which I thought was interesting.
That makes me want to read Matthew 24, which says, basically, starting in verse 3, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus answered them, See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. So, full stop, pause, let's comment on that, because for the longest time I heard it taught in church that there's going to be a guy that stands up and says, hey, I'm actually the Messiah, or I'm actually Christ. But I've come to look at this verse in a different light. What if Jesus is simply warning the disciples, there will be many coming saying, I am Jesus, I am the actual Christ, but they will lead many astray. And that's what we see with this apostate church concept, the priests that have done violence in the book of Ezekiel that we're told about, who totally hid their eyes from his law and taught lawlessness and led the flock astray. And they are all saying that Jesus, or Yeshua, is the Christ. Yet we see in Matthew chapter 7 that many will come to him and say, Lord, Lord, have we not done all these mighty things in your name and cast out demons? And he's going to declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye who practice lawlessness. And this is absolutely the figure of the Antichrist, a person who comes in the mimicry or image of Christ, but justifies lawlessness. And I think that's what we can be looking out for, is this Catholic rendition of Jesus is what the whole world is being prepped for to receive on the scene as almost like a Christ figure. And he shows up and is like, hey, guess what? I'm Jesus. I've been the one you've been praying to all along, but let me just tell you how things are a little different and how you're all actually wrong, but all of you had little pieces of the puzzle, and we can all come together in an ecumenical movement and worship ourselves, because all of you can also ascend to godhood following after me. And so that's the whole premise of the Christ consciousness trap that really the New Age is bringing onto the world, this mindset that was really tied back to the very first lie in the Garden of Eden, that you can be as God. And of course, back to the point, in the video, this crown of thorns disappears. So is this signaling the revelation of the Antichrist's identity as, not a suffering servant, but rather this, everyday man figure, that now he's not just Jesus, he can be, anybody can now step into this role, and that's how you have this whole Mark of the Beast topic come in, and people, signing in and becoming part of the board, or the one world consciousness, which is tied to the Tower of Babel and the slight against God of all people coming together to try to kill God or replace God. And we have to be prepared, because what if somebody shows up on the scene and calling themselves Jesus Christ, and yet they're teaching lawlessness? Are we prepared to call them out as the Antichrist, waiting and holding off for the true Messiah to return, as lightning from one end of heaven to the other? He's going to come riding in on that cloud. where every eye can see him. It's not going to be this Antichrist figure that comes out of this church system. Tony, you wanted to go ahead and say a bit there?
I was just going to keep. I mean, you said it all very well. And to tie it in with it, the next scene after he comes out, the AC is come out, and he's riding on the boat away from his mother. It cuts to a scene of that child that was with the Black Madonna, who is now alive again, and he's spinning, and you can see he has the one eye symbolism. And he ends up spinning. He's in the middle left of the screen. And this scene made me think a lot of the devil taking Yeshua to a high mountain and promising him all the kingdoms of the world. This is what I thought of when I saw this.
Oh.
And he just sits there and spins over all of these kingdoms. And then it cuts immediately to this scene, which was basically the Antichrist figure looming over all of these crowds that are all facing him. So I assume it's worship. And then he destroys them all in this wave. This wave ends up obliterating everyone.
All of these, like, ashmen, all carrying briefcases, looking like sleeping businessmen, which reminds me of those Chinese burial sites with the armies that are all buried with the various generals or whoever, and all those porcelain armies.
Terracotta army?
Terracotta armies. It really looks like one of those.
Yeah.
And, as we kind of draw towards the end of the video, you see meteors shooting out of this sun and destroying pyramids. And
yep.
Of course, pyramids being a sign associated with the United States, the system of Egypt here is definitely in place. It's on our dollar bills and a lot of the symbols for the United States. You have Egyptian symbology. So in the clouds, you have a scorpion tail. You can see there some type of scorpion cloud formation. So, there's a lot of symbols in here that we can unpack even further, but I think just this first overview, pointing out the Antichrist agenda and the rebirthing of this Christ consciousness coming out of the Christian church, I think all of this is some great points, and putting it together in this episode concisely is going to help a lot of people see that there's definitely something to this video and its predictive nature in regards to 2020.
When I saw I didn't see them as meteors. I saw them as a third of the stars being cast to Earth. But I guess we would see that as meteors. But when it hit the pyramids and destroys them, my brain thought there's a reason that they're called Babylonian mysteries. Because back in the day, he didn't teach. He can't. The enemy can't teach even his followers exactly what he believes. He has to give them some kind of weird version of it, so that when it comes end game time, he can change the whole system. There isn't a certain group that goes, "Oh no, we're still your people. You owe us." Everybody gets changed. He's wiping. I mean, it says in Revelation that, or Thessalonians, that he puts himself against every god and every so-called god. So all of the false gods, he's going against those too. Which I can see Christians going, yeah, see, he's against the false gods. But I mean, it's going to be really very deceptive. And so when I see Egypt crumble, to me, it's like the final thing. It was built with Egypt, and then he destroys Egypt and takes his spot.
And of course, it was the American system that was designed to basically be this powerful nation, so that when it was crumbling, out of its ashes could be born this new world order. And you see that in a lot of the language behind some of these Bilderberger secret society types. This call for a new world order to be drawn out of the ashes of this system that we find here in the United States of America, and of course, you almost have this story that talks about a false flag and destruction that comes to the United States of America, nuclear war, and all of it culminating in the birth of this Antichrist figure, and so. Just a lot of interesting stuff, man. I think we've covered all that we should in this particular episode.
Yeah, we could do probably 4 more into like the little details, like the little stuff that's all the way in the background that, like if Disney does it, these people are doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And bottom line, the most I have gotten out of this that I'm going to take away from some of the videos I've studied on this iPet goat thing is that the occult absolutely is looking to the stars for signs for when to move forward. And it
100%.
really does look like in 2020 they got some of the things that they were waiting for. This annular eclipse on July 21st on Father's Day, same thing that we saw in 2001, and also this buck moon followed by what I think is the mark of Cain in the sky. And, of course, you can maybe see that correlation. Maybe I'm off on this, but it is something that happened on that July 5th date. Another thing I want to point out is that perhaps we should be paying attention to world events tied to those dates, or at least following the date of July 4th and July 5th, where that buck moon was, a figure coming out of Christianity, preaching or
maybe
propagating a Christ consciousness mentality. So anyways, that's enough rambling, man. Let's go ahead and wrap up this episode. Thank you
all right
for watching this show of For What It's Worth.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Bye, guys. Bye, Jake.
Peace out.
When words swim up from the depths of the hearts of man and cascade as rivers across their lips, the same utterances are always spoken. The opinion of the tongue that has spoken it. Therefore, we must traverse the spoken waters of man carefully, guiding each other to the absolute river of truth. And in turn, we must gather all we can while taking it drop by drop for what it's worth.